Okay, hi everyone. I'm Christian Jens, CNCF Ambassador and Cloud Consultant at SafeWD, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. I'd like to thank everyone who is joining us today. We would like to welcome you. And our presenter today, Randy Abernethy, Managing Partner at RXM. A few housekeeping items before we get started. During the webinar, you are not able to talk as an attendee. There is a QA box at the bottom of your screen. I see some people already found it. Can you hear us now? That would be a good thing. Also, please feel free to drop your questions in there. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Great, people can hear us. And found the Q&A section. That's the first at this point in time. The session is being recorded and will be sent out afterward along with a link to the presentation. So keep an eye out of that, also in the CNCF website. With that, I'll hand it over to Randy to kick off today's presentation.
All right, thanks, Christian. So Randy Abernethy here. Thanks everybody again for joining. The echo, I heard some folks mention echo, might have been my mic. I left it open there while Christian was talking, but hopefully that'll be sorted out by now. If you do have any issues, you can just drop them in the chat and hopefully we can address them as we go through the material. But this presentation is everything you need to know about the CKA and the CKAD. So we're going to kind of cover what the certifications are all about, sort of their purpose, and also a little bit of the logistics and, kind of operational details about those guys. Okay, so of course, these certifications are through the CNCF. The CNCF is an open source, open governance foundation under the Linux Foundation. And so, when Google was sort of looking for a home for Kubernetes, it seemed like it would be interesting to create a foundation that created a place where projects that fit into this kind of next generation containerized microservice dynamic orchestration, approach to building and deploying applications could kind of congregate. And that's really what the CNCF is all about. So one of the things I personally love about the CNCF is that it has a focus, it has a kind of a centerpiece, and it has momentum, and it's driving the space. In addition to just being a home for the projects, it's a place where people come together to push forward ideas that interoperate and work together. And so one of the things that kind of probably seemed obvious was, if we're going to kind of drive the community together and if we're all going to sort of agree on some basic things, wouldn't it be nice to have some ability to certify people and to create some sort of guarantees around foundational knowledge and things like that? I think really that's how this all shook out. So the CNCF is really out there to build, per the bullet, a sustainable ecosystem for this whole next generation application development space. So pretty neat. So one of the things that makes the whole, cloud native environment so vibrant is the platform that many people are working with, which is Kubernetes. And so by providing a sort of a nexus and a common language, it allows people to innovate, I think, faster and with more assurance that there is a substrate that they can count on. And Kubernetes has been adopted, kind of across the board by all the cloud vendors. So you've got, Google, of course, offered GKE in the early days. And then you've got Amazon with EKS, Azure, IBM. All of the big clouds have a Kubernetes hosted solution. And you've, of course, got the big software vendors, the Dell, EMC, VMware, Pivotal Crew offering PKS as a solution with, integration of lots of other tools like Bosch for deployment and support and, all the networking stuff all wired in and everything. Same thing from the Red Hat IBM camp with OpenShift. And then you've got a lot of, kind of pure upstream solutions like Rancher. You've got managed solutions from independents like Giant Swarm, and the list goes on. And even platforms that people use as alternatives to Kubernetes, like Mesos, which sort of cropped up out of the big data era there with, Hadoop and Spark and all those sorts of things. It's been around, quite a bit longer than Kubernetes and has, deep roots, but you can run Kubernetes on top of Mesos thanks to Mesosphere's efforts. So Kubernetes is really becoming sort of the lingua franca here. And because of that, because of its importance, it's a capacity that a lot of companies are looking to fulfill when it comes to knowledge, experience, and and skill. And so, one of the things that certification brings to the table is a baseline, right? If you're a hiring manager, you may or may not have a great ability to assess somebody's skills in brand new technologies that are just coming out and that you're trying to move forward in the effort to adopt. And so certification gives us a baseline. Not everybody's a fan of certification. I personally, in the broad sense, am not. And I work at a company that spends half its time doing training and certification. So I think there's a lot of certifications that maybe cause people to focus on learning things that are more book oriented rather than practical skills and stuff like that. One of the things I love about the Kubernetes certifications and Linux Foundation in general is that they're all practical. You don't answer questions on a test. You solve problems in a Kubernetes cluster, right? It's very, very practical. And so while certifications can't cover every base, they can't guarantee senior managers that these people are going to have every possible expertise they might need. They can definitely provide a baseline. If you've studied hard enough to pass these tests, you've got enough basic knowledge and enough basic skills, and you can perform these tasks fairly quickly because the tests are timed, that it creates a baseline, right? It just creates a conversation that we can have about core skills. And the neat thing about the test process in these certifications also is that somebody has to create these tests, right? And when the Linux Foundation establishes these tests, they don't create them. They get people from the community, experts from all different, camps, completely different companies, sometimes, dead competitors, sitting in the room, collaborating, talking about what should be on this test. And so this test contains, and the curriculum contains, the best ideas from some of the brightest leading companies in this space about what somebody should really know. And that in itself is a work product, right? So coming up with a baseline of this is the curriculum, this is the stuff you should know if you're a Kubernetes administrator as a baseline. Everybody should sort of know these things. That alone is a valuable thing, and it requires community effort, right? The community has to come together to some degree to get to that agreement. And so setting up that baseline, getting the key concepts out, figuring out what matters most, what's in common that everybody can agree on. Maybe OpenShift cares more about these things, and PKS cares more about those things, and EKS cares more about these things, but everybody together agrees that these are really core competencies. And so the other thing that certification brings to the table is kind of a call to action. Hey, here is an opportunity to get a level of credibility, under your belt. So there may be people out there on the fence, and say, hey, well, look, there's a way I can measure my skill set, and so if I study really hard, I can go out there and cover this hurdle. Somebody who's working every day in Kubernetes might learn a lot of stuff by studying and taking that test, because it stretches them, right? It takes them into other areas of core competency where they can get along with the knowledge they have, but they might be a better administrator if they covered some of these basic skills. So I think there's a lot of value in the right kinds of certification. So value proposition, goes lots of ways. Individuals, right? So if you're an individual in this space, and I can assure you of this because I've seen it happen. Our guys are trying to, people are trying to poach our guys left, right, and center. So if you're looking for a new job, this is definitely a great thing to have on your LinkedIn profile. Certification tells other people that you have this base level of knowledge. They realize you might not be the super expert, or you might have a very vectored focus in your skill set, but you're at least going to have this common baseline of skills, and you've proven that you can pass this test, which is a challenge because it's practical. You can do these things. You can add nodes to clusters. You can, upgrade the system. You can do all of the stuff that, the curriculum talks about. Partner organizations also, get a lot of benefit here. Certification allows, professional services organizations who want to demonstrate expertise and things like that to be able to tell their clients, hey, we We have folks here who know what they're doing. So tied to these certifications are organizational certifications, right? Kubernetes certified solution providers have to have X many, 3 I believe is the number, certified Kubernetes administrators. So you show that you've got a capacity of core competence in your organization. And then you have platform vendors also. There's certification for the platform vendors. So if you're Amazon and you're going to offer Kubernetes as a service, people are like, well, we've got all this Kubernetes stuff running in our data center. How do we know it's going to work when we, bring it to Amazon? Well, because it's a certified platform. And so it's passed all of these tests. It can run all of these standard kinds of manifests and has the features that you would expect of a robust Kubernetes solution. So certification really has a role to play in a lot of different areas, for individuals to prove their competence, for organizations to prove their competence, and for platform vendors to prove their competence and compliance and interoperability. So it's a pretty valuable proposition across the board. So what programs are there? I mentioned a bunch of them there, but here's the concise list. So from the CNCF through the Linux Foundation, you've got Certified Kubernetes Administrator. So this certification says that you know how to administer a Kubernetes platform. You can install, configure, maintain, upgrade, operate that platform on a day-to-day basis. Then there's the Kubernetes Certified Application Developer. This is a certification that says you know how to use Kubernetes as a platform to deploy applications. And that's what really Kubernetes is all about, right? It's supposed to make application deployment easy, effective, scalable, automatable, all of that sort of stuff. And it's not a freebie, right? If you want to take advantage of auto scaling, of rolling upgrades and all these types of things that are really application centric, right? If you think about the separation of responsibilities here, the people who run the platform, if you're using, Kubernetes on Azure, the guys from Azure don't show up at your stand-up. They run their platform and you just don't talk to them, right? If something bad happens on the platform, A, that's going to be pretty rare, and B, you're going to create a Tarball ticket and they're going to process it as a separate organization. This can happen even inside a company, right? Inside your company, there are people who run the Kubernetes platform and there are people who use it. And the whole point of the Kubernetes platform is it's self-serve, right? You create these manifests, build pipelines that automate all of the toil and get the applications deployed. And it's the DevOps team that owns the application that decides how it runs when it gets out there. And so there's a lot to know, as the bottom line, about how to set up deployments with pods and all that sort of stuff. And so that's the CKAD. And so they're distinctly different, right? CKA and CKAD. Yeah, they're both on Kubernetes, but it's a very different vector, right? A very different set of skills. Then you've got the Certified Solution Provider. So I keep saying solution provider. It's actually Kubernetes Certified Service Provider, KCSP. And that's the organization level certification that you get if you've got if you apply. Of course, you have to be a credible service provider and you have to have X many, the number currently is 3 CKAs working for you. Then you've got Certified Kubernetes Conformance Program, CKCP, and that is for people who want to have a certified Kubernetes distro. So if you're in the business of packaging up software and building installers or managing solutions for customers, those customers want to know that when they take their deployments and their services and their ingresses and all this sort of stuff from their cloud provider and move it onto your platform, that it's just going to work. And that's where the CKCP comes into play. Really big piece of the puzzle. Cool. So those are the programs. So what about the exams? For CKA, you have a pretty robust battery of questions that is 24 different problems that you're going to have to solve, and you have 3 hours to do it. So, you can do the math. There's X amount of time per problem, and you can take the average, right, and say, okay, that's about how long I should spend on each problem. To see how long you're going to get. And I can assure you, though, that they're not symmetrical. Some of these problems are do something that's going to take you 10 minutes, right, if you're fast on the cluster. And some of these questions are do something that you can type a single command and be done in a few seconds, right? It's a range of stuff, right, that you're going to get. And so you have to kind of look at how the problems are weighted and what the points are for them to kind of come up with a strategy as you're taking the test. But there's 24 problems, right? That's what you get to know. And so, by the way, don't expect any sort of inside tips here in this session. That's not going to happen. When my firm does courses to prepare people for the test, we just cover the stuff that's provided by CNCF, because CNCF provides you everything you need to know to study and get good at the things that you're going to need to do on the test. The one thing that's really critical, though, is the time, right? And watching the time. So time management's a big deal. But CKA, 24 problems in 3 hours. CKAD, 19 problems in 2 hours. And again, both of these are practical tests. So the proctoring system is really kind of cool because it allows you to take this test anywhere. When my firm does kind of a boot camp, we do the class for 4.5 days, and then we have everybody take the test in the last half of the last day, and then it's proctored by somebody who can't be the instructor, right? Somebody else has to come in and supervise the test taking. But if you wanted to, right, if your chops are good enough and you wanted to, you could just take this test anytime. And the way that the proctoring works in that scenario is, and it's the same basically if you're taking it in a classroom, is you turn on your laptop, you enable screen sharing, right? So the proctor can watch your screen. You shut down all applications except your browser. And then in one of your browser tabs, you're going to have the test environment. And that browser tab is basically a HTML5 view into a computer. And then from that computer, you can jump into different clusters and configure different things and solve all the questions that are asked you in the problems. And so the proctor is A, watching your screen, B, watching your webcam and listening to your microphone. So all this stuff is turned on, right? And they'll ask you to, make sure that your room is clear of any clutter or information, right? They just want to make sure that everybody's getting a fair shake and that everybody's, 100% on the up and up when they're taking the test. You can't have your mom whispering the answers from the other room. They'll hear you. You can't have notes on the desktop. And you also can't just browse wherever you feel like, right? You can't just create a GitHub repo with all the answers to all of the hard problems that you think might be on the test in it. So you do get one other tab, though. And you can always look through Kubernetes.io docs, right? So you can look at all the documentation that's online. And you can also go to Kubernetes.io blog. And there's a lot of blog posts in there. And really, at the end of the day, this is all you need, right? I mean, if you can't find the little hints or tips or that, what is that? What was that one, spec key? I forget which word it was. You can look that stuff up pretty quick with Kube docs and the Kubernetes blog, the docs mostly, I would say. But if you need more help than that, you're not ready for this test, right? You've got to go fast to pass this test. You have to already know what to do and how to do it. Memorizing, all of the stuff you would put in a manifest and all the keys and value possibilities, that nobody's going to ever do that, right? That's what the docs are for. But at the end of the day, if you need more help than that, you're probably not ready for the test, is what I would say. Interestingly, the CKA was one of the first programs that was created out of all of these. CKAD came later. And it's really popular, 3,200 registrants for the CKA as of October of last year, and that's obviously gone up from there. I saw some questions, or actually there was a question that I answered before we started. It's like, hey, what versions are supported and what's the test environment going to test us on, and is it keeping up? So as you can imagine, Kubernetes is coming out pretty frequently, right? We've got, 1.14 coming next month probably. We're on 1.13 now. So this is a lot of work for the Linux Foundation, because not only do they have to update the problems, which is probably pretty easy, not a lot to do there, but they have to update all of the clusters, right? When you take this test, there are multiple clusters that you're going to face off against to do these problems, and they've got to upgrade all of them. They have to test everything to make sure that your test experience, is flawless. So it is a bunch of work. They also have curriculum, right? There's Linux Foundation courses that are designed to prepare you for these tests, and those have to be updated. So there's a lot of work. So it does trail, right? It's not going to be day and date. Here comes Kubernetes 1.14, boom, that day the test is now 1.14. No, it's a little bit behind. But for example, 1.13 is going to be the solution for the test environment in February. We're in February. I believe it's today. If I'm not wrong, Caitlin can correct me at the end here if I'm off by a day or two, but it's real soon now, right? So at some point we should have have the absolute latest in our testing environment. Then of course, a month later, they're going to come out with a new version, but you're pretty close, right? There's a lot of people running, Kubernetes 110 or 109, right? 1.9 or 1.8 even, you see out there. So, it's pretty current. So you will need to know, how to get around in the current version. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of the dichotomy here. If you've studied, I would really recommend you study on the version that you're going to take, because if you're going to take the test and the test is going to be on 113 and you study under 112, can you pass? Of course you can, right? The test is, if you look at the curriculum, it's about core Kubernetes concepts, right? They're not like, hey, let's test them on the absolute latest thing that just happened in 113. That wouldn't be either fair or useful, right? So that's not happening. But the problem is kubectl output changes, right? I'm practicing. I have all my ways of making myself go fast. And I know that the kubectl output says, hey, this is deprecated, use one of these. And so I can just type a short, easy command, have kubectl give me the prompts that I need, and I can grab the stuff that I want and drop it in and go. Well, maybe in 113 that changes. Now kubectl doesn't give you those warnings anymore, right? It's subtle things like that that can have an outsized impact on you, right? If you were counting on that tip to help you go fast, now all of a sudden that doesn't show up, you find yourself digging around in the docs and wasting 2 or 3 minutes. And that might not sound like a big deal, but those 3 hours are going to go really, really fast, I promise you. So every minute you can shave off is a good one. So best to, to drill yourself on the version that you're actually going to take the test on. But I wouldn't overstress the value of that. It's nice, it's nice to have. So what are the details of the exam? Let's go through some of the bullets. CKA, CKD. So how much does the exam cost? The CKA is $300 US and includes a free retake. So that's awesome, right? You get the ability to take the exam, and it might be a shocker for you, right? If you've never done like a hands-on practical proctored exam, it could be stressful, right? It could be, you could be nervous, and you could make mistakes just because you're nervous or under stress, rather than, in your comfortable lab environment that you're used to working in. Maybe you would have passed the test without the stress. So, the Linux Foundation understands that. So you get to take the test once, get the feel, understand what's going on. And if something caught you by surprise and caused you to not pass, you can do a free retake. And I think you have a year to do the free retake. So plenty of time, right? And I wouldn't wait a year. I would, if you took the test and didn't pass, which no shame in that. Some people take the test and plan not to pass, right? They study a little bit and say, okay, I want to take the test now before I study too much, just so I can understand what it's all about. I'm going to try it. I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to plan. I'm going to plan for that. I'm not quite ready. I know I'm not. I want to see what the environment's like, see how it works. I know that I probably won't pass, and then I'm going to take it again in 2 weeks, and I'll spend those 2 weeks just drilling and working really hard, and then come back and try to pass it. So there's different strategies, right? But the good news is that if some untoward thing causes you to not pass the test, or maybe you're halfway through the test and there's some emergency in your life, right? You have to go take your mom to the hospital or something, right? I mean, in general, they're going to probably give you a concession for that. But again, even if not, you always have a free retake. Even if your excuse is sort of lame, oh, the ice cream man came, whatever it is, right? You get a free retake. So what version of Kubernetes is used in the exam? We talked about that, right? It's pretty darn current, right? And they're keeping it up to date as best they can, and I think they do a fantastic job of it. How are the exam proctored? I sort of talked about that, right? They're basically going to enter your space 150%, right? They're going to be listening what's going on in your room, watching what's going on in front of your computer, capturing your screen, right? So it's a real serious deal. But the beauty is, because all it requires is a laptop and an empty room, you could do it in a hotel or wherever you happen to be. What languages are the exams offered in? At the moment, it's English only. And that's a downer for some folks, but at the end of the day, the Kubernetes manifests and docs are, sort of have their bias towards English. And so it is somewhat realistic that at least that's the place they start. And so I'm sure as comments come in, other things may be considered, but that's the current status. How are the exams scored? Scoring is automated, and results are emailed within 36 hours from the time of the exam. So this is great, right? You don't have to wait forever, chomping on your nails to find out. And in my experience, because it's automated, right? The scoring is automated, right? Basically the next day, has been my experience. So I don't want to lock it in, right? They say 36 hours, but 36 hours is only a day and a half, right? That's pretty darn good. And then how long is the certification valid? 2 years. So I am gearing up already because my 2-year certification is getting ready to expire, and I got to get recertified. So that's a pretty good chunk of time, and it's also a nice thing for hiring managers, right? You're not a CKA if you took the test 5 years ago. You couldn't have, right, at this point in time. But as time moves on, people who got certified on Kubernetes ancient version whatever, are not going to be certified after 2 years. So you have to prove your skills on a repeating basis throughout time, which is really pretty reasonable if you consider the pace of technology. So what's on the CKA exam? Right, the loaded question everybody wants to know the secret of. Well, the good news is there's no secret. This is published on the CNCF website. It's the curriculum, quote unquote. So the word curriculum, what does that mean? Well, it can mean a bunch of different things, but in this case, it means the corpus of knowledge that you are expected to have a modest level of mastery over, right? So let's just go through them. Application lifecycle. Clearly, if you are administering a cluster, you have to know how to roll out and roll back deployments of pods and stuff like that, right? So all the things that fit into that. And by the way, this is a one-liner bullet. If you look at the curriculum PDF on the CNCF website, there's sub-bullets, right? They're going to give you a lot more context and detail. So this is the webinar, right? I just want to orient you. You can go there and read that on your own. So scaling, right, that sort of stuff. You're going to need to understand and know how to work with those things, because even though as an administrator, you're not the application person, perhaps, right? Other people are deploying their apps on the platform you run, but administrators run their own apps, right? You're going to DNS. So is that not an application? It sort of is, right? So you need to know these skills, and that's 8% of the overall points on the test. Not necessarily 8% of the number of problems, but 8% of the credit, right? So when you're taking a problem, it's going to tell you what percentage this problem is worth. And so if you see a problem that's hard and it's a low percentage, or hard for you and low percentage, well, that might be one of the ones you skip until you have time at the end to come back at it, right? That's just a strategy, suggestion. But you definitely want to look at how these are weighted. Some of these questions could be really heavily weighted, and it might be hard, but it might be really worth it to do the hard work to get those points, right? But that's just test-taking strategy. The next one, installation, configuration, and validation, right? So how do you set up a highly available cluster? How do you, expand it and stuff like that? All the, basic deployment and infrastructure types of issues associated with standing up Kubernetes and expanding it and upgrading it, that sort of stuff. So that's 12%. Core concepts. Clearly, you need to be pretty strong here because this is 1/5 of the points essentially, right? It's API primitives, right? You need to understand the resources, right, that are involved in Kubernetes, clusters and namespaces and all that sort of stuff, the architecture of the cluster, network primitives, CNI, all that sort of stuff. And then on the networking side, on the specific networking side, you have to have a handle on ingress, DNS, pod and node network configuration, load balancing, things like that. And you'll see some of these topics crop up in different areas, and that's because they're cross-cutting, right? They are, there's networking concepts are core concepts, but they're also obviously specific to networking. So hard to say exactly which categories things might show up in, but you kind of get the idea. 11% for networking. Scheduling, using labels for scheduling, and then daemon sets and how schedulers work and how you can choose different schedulers and set up multiple schedulers, those sorts of things. And so you might look at this and you go, wow, I've never done some of these exotic run your own scheduler and stuff like that stuff. Well, take a look at the percentage here. And, if you've got a limited amount of time to study, you might decide how much weight you put on this, right? Clearly, scheduling is the least important of these categories side by side with logging and monitoring. As far as points on the test is concerned, clearly it's important, but everything here is important, so you just have to weight it. Security, auth-in, auth-z, right? Authentication, authorization, network policy, TLS setup, all of that stuff's pretty important. Cluster maintenance, so upgrades, backup, restore procedures, pretty important. Logging and monitoring. So understanding, how monitoring, metric server basics, log management, those sorts of things. That's a key piece of the puzzle. Now, one thing I'll say when we get to this point, right? the clusters use specific plugins, right? If you're thinking about a Kubernetes cluster, you're probably assuming there's a CNI plugin. Clearly, there doesn't have to be, right? You could use flat networking and other things, but these days most people are using CNI, and if you're using kubeadmin, it's going to require CNI. You can hack it, of course, and go back to other configurations, but CNI is sort of the thing. So so these clusters are going to have a CNI plugin. And you can, again, this is all documented, right? I'm not providing any secrets here. When you look at the actual, cluster configurations for the test, they'll tell you this is the kind of cluster you're going to have. It's going to be this version. We're going to have this CNI plugin. Some of the clusters are Flannel, and some are Calico. Last I checked. So again, what I'm telling you is contemporaneous with today, but 4 months from now, when they update the test and change things, the cluster configurations could change. So the important thing is to know that this is an issue and that you should look up what's going to be current for your test. Do you need to know Calico and how to set it up? No, this isn't a test on Calico, right? It's going to be, you're going to get a cluster, and to make a working cluster, they have to provide a networking plugin. So you'll have, some networking plugin, and you better know how, the network policy works, and understand that, you have to have a plugin that supports it, and, some of the basics, things like that. But what if your environment uses Weave, right? And you don't know anything about Calico or Flannel? That's okay, right? You probably won't have any issues as long as you understand how Kubernetes views the Kubernetes interface to the underlying solution. So that's one of the things I wanted to get clear. When we start talking about logging and monitoring, the sky's the limit, right? There's a gajillion different possibilities for logging and monitoring and things like that. But you can expect the things that are core Kubernetes, right? Like the metric server, yeah, that's going to be there. Stuff like that. Storage, PVs and PVCs, volume access modes. All that stuff's going to be important. And then troubleshooting, so application and cluster failure. You should expect questions on the test where it's like, this is broken, fix it, where you just have to figure out what's going on yourself. Network troubleshooting, that's a fair sized piece of the equation. All right, so one thing to think about, if you look at the sidebar here, there could be more than one way to solve a given problem, right? You want the quickest one. So one of the things that you want to think about, right, is there might be a fast way to do this. And it might not be the way you would do it in a production system, but it's the fastest way to do it, and it does solve the problem. On this test, that's probably what you want to do, because you're timed. And I'm telling you, if I haven't said it enough times, time is your enemy on this test. You've got to go fast. If you take forever to do everything, I mean, that's part of being certified, right? You have to be able to get stuff done quickly. People are going to be paying you for your services, and if you take forever, obviously it's going to be pretty expensive for your clients, and people want that assurance that you can do things, promptly. So, think about that. There may be multiple ways to solve a problem. What's the fastest one? So, for example, if you are a perfect typist and you have a photographic memory, and you can open up an editor and right off the top of your head type in a complex, perfect deployment manifest with all of the pod specifications for health checks and everything else without making a single typo, then please send me your resume. I would like to hire you. Otherwise, if you're like the rest of us, then don't try to do that, right? That's a disaster waiting to happen. Use kubectl run to create something close to what you want, or kubectl create to create something close to what you want. Use the ---- dry run switch and the -o YAML to dump out the output of the thing, right? And then use that, edit that to create the thing that you want, right? So there's all sorts of, things you can think of to help yourself go fast, to avoid, things that are going to take you a long time, send you down a rat hole, or slow you down. So what's on the CKAD exam? Core concepts, right? So primitives, API primitives, and pods. Pretty much everybody needs to understand, the primitive resource types, but these are going to be focused more on the developer side of things. Configuration, so resource requests and limits, right? How much memory and CPU should you give these pods or these containers? Security context, config maps, secrets, service accounts, right? All the types of things you need to do that you need to know how to create in order to make your app work, right? All those configuration primitives. Your app might need access to the API server, in which case you're going to need a service account and, a secret and some roles and role bindings and things like that, right? So practice deploying real applications of different types and see what you need to know to do that. Multi-container pods, right? Understand these different patterns like the ambassador pattern, the adapter pattern, sidecar pattern. Brendan Burns did a nice blog in the Kubernetes blog way back about, you know, these different patterns. You don't need to memorize them, but if you're familiar with them, then when a question on the test comes up and says, do this, you're going to go, oh, I know, I can use this pattern where I have, you know, an ambassador. So I'm going to have the main container, you know, provide the service to the outside world. And then that guy's going to call the ambassador, which is then going to know which Redis, you know, shard to talk to, you know, and that way the main application container doesn't need to know that, right? So if you're not familiar with those patterns, you want to probably brush up on that. Observability, liveness and readiness probes, logging, monitoring, right? Kubectl top, all that sort of stuff. You don't want to be familiar with those things. Pod design, how to do rollouts, rollbacks, how to not only create long-running services with deployments, but also how to create one-shot jobs and cron jobs and stuff like that, understanding metadata, labels, selectors, annotations. Services and networking, you're going to need to understand network policy, right? If you're deploying applications, you might want to set up policy that controls access to them and access between services. And then state persistence, understanding persistent volume claims. A lot of applications may need, you know, some storage vehicle, so that's going to be important. And then on the sidebar there, it kind of mentions that in the CKAD, you know, you've got 6 minutes per question on average, right? When you look at the breakdown here, it's a little bit more evenly distributed. So, you know, you kind of have a pretty good grasp of all of these things, and you're going to have to, again, go fast. And so if something looks like it's going to take you more than 6 minutes in this one, since since the distribution's a little bit more normalized, you might want to say, well, if I can do it, if I know I can do it, great, maybe do it. If you're not sure, that's maybe one you want to skip, because you can always come back, right? You can go through these questions as often as you want, but at some point, you know, you got to actually answer some. So if you think you can answer it, you should probably stop and do it. But if you're not sure, you know, maybe you want to skip it. So resources. Where do I get help with this stuff? Well, the exam curriculum guides are on GitHub. So in CNCF curriculum, this is going to give you not you know, like here, hey, here's you know, here's all the answers, or here's the things that you need to, you know, need to study. It's more like how the proctoring system works, how to sign up, when you can do your retakes. It's more the administrative stuff that it's going to help you with, right? But the curriculum guide, that's the like the FAQs and the handbooks and things. But the curriculum guide, that's the thing where you have the curriculum, right? That's those bullets that I just showed you of the different topics you need to cover, what percentages are assigned to each one, and then the sub bullets, which I didn't share with you. But if you go to the curriculum guide, the first bullet there, that's all the detailed information about what you need to study. To me, that's the most important thing. If you don't feel like you have a pretty good manual capability, right, on your own, being able to do the things that are covered in that curriculum, then maybe you should study some more. Certificate, FAQ, again, that's, you know, general questions about the test, not specific content type questions. The handbook is, again, more like how the proctoring works, how the sign up works, when can you do your retakes. Exam tips, you know, also I think more kind of broad stuff. It's what you should look at every one of these, right? But clearly the curriculum to me for content is the one that you really want to focus on. Kubernetes from scratch. This is a great place on the Kubernetes docs site where you can kind of walk through some of the, you know, raw setup of Kubernetes and really learn the basics. This is specifically if you're for the CKA folks. Kubernetes up and running, great for everybody. Super awesome book. And as you can see, Chelsea Hightower, who is currently the chair of the technical oversight committee for the CNCF, the whole CNCF. And then Brendan Burns and Joe Beta, two of the founding folks in the Kubernetes community. So pretty authoritative. Great way to learn Kubernetes across the board. CatConda interactive browser-based scenarios are really great for drilling and testing yourself. For me personally, I like to just like stand up a single node kubeadm box on my own system and hack around that way. But again, you know, to each his own. CatConda is great, and if you use whatever you like, even, you know, a hosted solution can be good. I personally prefer a local VM that has been kubeadm'd on top of Docker to play with, because it gives me access to everything top to bottom. And if you're doing the CKA, I think that maybe helps with the knowledge and experience and learning. So that's just my preference. It's not the only way to do it, of course. So getting trained, definitely want to think about that. There's lots of possibilities, right? There's Introduction to Kubernetes, LFS 158. That's a free course on edX. Gajillions of people, I don't know the exact number, but a lot of people have taken that. Kubernetes Fundamentals, LFS 258 is a great instructor-led course. That's the one that's going to prepare you for the CKA. Kubernetes for Developers, that's the one that's going to prepare you for the CKAD. And then Kubernetes Administration. Kubernetes Fundamentals is a self-paced guide. Sorry, that's the prep one. Kubernetes Administration, the last one in the list here, that's the one, LFS 458. That's the one that prepares you for the CKA. And Kubernetes for Developers prepares you for the CKAD. The Fundamentals course is like a self-study kind of independent one. Very similar to the administration course, but sort of the self-study approach. So those are the main bits of curriculum that come from the Linux Foundation. And of course, in addition to Kubernetes certified service providers, there are Kubernetes training partners. And training partners are KCSPs, but they also do training. And so they have training credentials. They are actively operating in the training space. My firm's listed there, RXM. And then you've got a ton of other great companies all over the place. Linux Foundation, you can go to the horse's mouth and sign up there. Many of the KTPs offer courses that show up on the Linux Foundation's board, so you can use that as a nexus to see all the stuff that's going on. And this, by the way, is just the CNCF Cloud Native Interactive Landscape. So you can, if you go to the Cloud Native Landscape, which is landscape.cncf.io, the link's on the very top there, you can just, pull this up. It's one of the categories that you can flip through. You can see the nav on the left if you choose category KTP. All righty. Well, I think that's just about it. So thanks a ton for coming. This is my information. Feel free to shout at me any which way you like. I'm a fairly busy cat, but I will always try to respond if I can. And so just do give me maybe a day or two to come back at you, but if you send me a note, I'll try to respond. So maybe I'll turn it back over to Christian and we can do the wrap.
Awesome. Thanks for a great presentation. And yes, you are busy, but you're totally reachable as well on Slack and so on. So that works. I tried. We now have some time for questions. If you have a question that you would like to ask, please drop it in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we have time. I answered a few of them already just because we just have 13 minutes left, but there are still 27. So I hope it's okay if I just skip through some of yours if you ask multiple ones. So first of all, there is Walid Shari. Do we anticipate Kubernetes architect exam soon? Now that you covered the admin and dev, what would be next?
That's a good question. I know some things are percolating. And the way this stuff usually works is, it's all community driven, right? If the community says, we really want to see a certification that allows us to verify expertise in a certain area, if that comes back to the folks at the CNCF, they're going to take it to heart and they're going to listen to the community. And, that's how this stuff all came about, right? This didn't exist when the CNCF started. Some folks, myself, I know was one of them, said, hey, this might be a really great thing for the community. And I know Dan took the ball and ran with it. And next thing you know, we got all sorts of things happening. So maybe Caitlin, I don't know if Caitlin's still on, but Caitlin's probably the authority here for that.
Yes. So,
Yeah, we're looking into a few different options right now. We're also looking to see if we're going to expand certification into some of the other CNCF projects. So I think it's going to depend on where the community interest is.
So yeah, totally bug them on Slack if you're interested. Then we have Patrick, who's asking if you were interested in both CKA and CKAD, which would make sense to pursue first?
That's a great question. If you're interested in both, so the CKAD is 2 hours. So if nothing else, it's a lower stress level. And I would say that if you can pass the CKA, you probably can pass the CKAD. And that's because administrators need to sort of understand, the ships that are floating on the ocean as well as the ocean, right? And so there's a lot of crossover in the CKA. And I think that's one of the reasons why maybe the CKA is harder, is that the curriculum is larger. You have to know more to pass the CKA. And so I don't, you know, it's kind of interesting question about strategy, because if you took the CKAD and passed it, you could conceivably take the CKA and fail it. If you took the CKA and passed it, I think that you have a really good shot of passing the CKAD. Not to say that it's exactly the same, because it isn't, for sure. It's really focused on, you know, more of the, you know, pods and deployments and the developer-centric stuff. And you do have to do some things that, you know, for sure, that aren't going to be on the CKA. So there's not a, you know, they don't overlap, or as far as I, you know, even intersect. But it's just if you look at the curriculum, what the overlap is, right? So I think it depends on your person. If you want to do the easier one first, I'd say do the CKAD. If you want to just study all in one fell swoop and, you know, take them sequentially, then maybe the CKA would be the one to start with, because if you can pass that, you know, you got a pretty good shot at the CKAD, even if you didn't, you know, do a ton of extra work. Hopefully that answers the question. I know I'm wishy-washy on that. Don't have a really good opinion.
Okay, I guess, yeah, that's my experience as well, by the way. So there is another question from Arun, and he is asking, do we have a free practice exam for CKAD, or at least a web resource for practice? That's asked quite often, actually. Like, is there something I can use for studying and also do a mock exam?
Yeah, there isn't. There's all sorts of environments like CatConda and things like that, where you can just, you know, get access to a Kubernetes cluster and hack away. And you know the curriculum, right? So you can create your own drills, and while they won't be the exact same questions on a test, any mock test wouldn't be the exact same questions on the test anyway. So it can be created, but as far as I know, there's certainly no CNCF or Linux Foundation resource for test, demo test or anything like that. Now, vendors who do boot camps on this stuff, you know, like my firm, for example, and others, can definitely do stuff like that. We for example, spend the morning of the last day drilling. And most of Thursday too, actually, on these 5-day sessions. And so we give drills, like we say, hey, okay, we're going to just throw a thing up here on the board and say, do this, and then you have to do it in a certain period of time. And we just sort of see how everybody does, and it like helps people understand, you know, where they're at and where they need to, you know, tighten up. But yeah, beyond companies, which any of those, you know, KTPs would be a good resource for this, I don't think there's anything else that I know of. Christian, you?
Yeah, so let's go to the next one. So how are the CKA exam problems rated? As in, if it's a 7% question and it's not complete the whole thing in time, do you get a partial percent in that case? So
I don't have insight into the wiring behind the scenes, but as I understand it, yes. So that there's, like, when their automation runs, it's checking for certain things, and it's not checking for trivial things, right? If it asks you to do something, it's verifying that was done. And if there are multiple steps, for example, it will check out the steps, and it can, you know, like you might have got part of it, but some of it, you know, you didn't, and it was all baked into one question, so they'll give you partial credit.
I think even when I got my results, like some of the numbers didn't add up, so they have to do partial grading from what I've experienced.
Yeah, right. You get a total percentage that's no combination of the test percentages, right?
Yeah. So it's really very badass intelligence that's running there. So next question. Right now, I have finished CKA course from Linux Foundation, and the content is based on 1.12. When will it be switched to 1.13? But I think that's more of a Linux Foundation training department question, right?
Right. And I believe the word we got was today.
Yeah, the exam is moved to 1.13. From what I got from the Linux Foundation training department, the materials are going to be updated in the next 1 to 3 months.
Okay.
So that's Linux Foundation training. Then there is a question, how many CKAs so far?
I don't know the answer to that because there's a lot of people that have signed up, but then not all of them have taken their test because they have like a year to take it. And so the number that the CNCF usually shares is the number of people signed up. So I'm not sure exactly how many CKAs there are, but Caitlin, can you comment?
I know we've had a few thousand take the exam. I don't know the updated number on how many have passed.
Right. So it's clearly hundreds, if not thousands. So you'll be in a rare crew, that's for sure.
Yep, definitely. There was one question which I clicked away accidentally, which was, can you use the kubectl cheat sheet from kubernetes.io? I think that's a yes, so I just wanted to answer that in text to speed this up a little. Next question would be, the CKA exam objectives gonna be changed in the next 6 months?
That is a great question, and as Yogi Berra says, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But I haven't heard any rumblings, and again, the CNCF is a community-based organization. Everything happens in the open. If you think it's out of date and you make a stir and you get people to echo your thoughts, they're going to act. They're going to update things. They also are proactive, right? They're out there looking at the pace of Kubernetes and what's happening. And so while the incremental updates to the exam and the materials are handling, organic operational changes to the actual platform, this switch is gone and now they added this one and that one's deprecated and now they added this, right? Those things are going to be addressed. But overall, the fundamental behaviors of the core concepts that you want an administrator to have are, in my view, aren't likely to, have any sort of seismic shifts, in the near future. Kubernetes is really, and you'll hear this from the Kubernetes cognoscenti, has sort of crossed the chasm. It's being adopted by early adopters in the enterprise for production solutions. So, it can't be, kind of jumping all over the map. It needs to be fairly stable. So I don't see any big changes in the exam objectives coming down the pipe in the next 6 months. But again, that's just a prediction. So we'll have to see what happens.
Great. So last question for today, just because it's like 3 minutes left. Sasha is asking, why is it even timed so tight?
Well, that's a great question. It's an open book test, and it's a practical test, right? You're updating a cluster. And so if you have access to the documentation, infinite amount of time, and a cluster that you can poke around, experiment with, try things. I mean, you could answer every single question knowing nothing but Linux, not even knowing Kubernetes, right? Because you could learn Kubernetes on the fly, figure everything out, and answer the test. But that's not what it's for, right? It's to show the world that you know Kubernetes. And if you take 3 hours to add a node to a cluster, people could question your knowledge of Kubernetes, right? You need to be able to do it faster than that to really say you're a highly skilled Kubernetes administrator. And I think that's the thing. So why is it time? So, it is there's no doubt. You're under pressure. It is hard to pass that test, but it can be done. And it's been done by lots of people. So, the good news is that the bad news is it's hard. The good news is it's hard. Right? It's a real certification. If you can do this stuff in that period of time, you are showing the world that you've got some pretty serious skills. And this is what, like when I'm hiring people, if they have a CKA, I respect that because that shows me, they have some pretty serious skills. So I think other managers are looking at it that way too. So yeah, it's it's a double-edged sword, but it is a challenge.
Great. So I think that's it for today. Thanks for joining us today. The webinar recording and slides will be up later today. We look forward to seeing you in the future webinars. Like, I've recognized some names already. Have a great day. And if you have questions or want to get hired after you pass the exam, you see his contact information. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everybody.